In a setting filled with injustice and unexpected twists, a Karen saleswoman strikes a black girl in a toy store, unaware that the girl's father is none other than Snoop Dogg, turning a discriminatory act into a shocking and unforgettable spectacle. The shovel struck something hard beneath the soil and Snoop froze. For 3 hours, he'd been digging in this same spot behind the old cedar tree. His fingers raw and blistered, sweat soaking through his flannel shirt despite the autumn chill. Now, in the dim glow of his lantern, he could make out the edge of something metal. His heart hammered against his ribs as he dropped to his knees and began clearing the dirt with his hands. "Please," he whispered, though he wasn't sure to whom. The metal box emerged slowly from the earth like a secret reluctantly surrendered. It was smaller than he remembered, just a regular toolbox rusted at the corners, its green paint chipped and faded. 25 years buried underground had not been kind to it. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Miss Harper again. The third call in an hour. He silenced it without looking and returned to his task, prying open the box with trembling hands. Inside, protected by layers of plastic, lay exactly what he'd come for. A stack of photographs, a small leather notebook, and a metal key on a faded red ribbon. Snoop lifted the key, its weight familiar, yet somehow heavier than he remembered. The photographs confirmed what he already knew. 3 teenage boys grinning at the camera, arms slung around each other's shoulders, standing in front of the very farmhouse that loomed behind him now. The sound of tires on gravel cut through the night. Headlights swept across the field as a car pulled into the long driveway. Snoop's muscles tensed. He'd known this moment would come, had planned for it even. But now that it was here, panic gripped him. There was no time to rebury the box or hide the evidence of his trespassing. The best he could do was stand his ground. Detective Karen stepped out of her unmarked sedan, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness until it found his face. Behind her, another car door slammed. Snoop squinted against the light, but recognized the silhouette immediately. Marcus Shaw, the last person he wanted to see tonight. "Drop what you're holding and put your hands where I can see them," Karen called out, her voice steady and authoritative. "He doesn't need to do that," Marcus said, moving forward. "He's expected." Karen turned, confusion evident in her posture. "Mr. Shaw, I thought you reported a break-in." "I did," Marcus replied, his eyes never leaving Snoop's. "But I didn't say who it was." The two men stared at each other across the yard, 25 years of silence stretching between them like a chasm. In Marcus's weathered face, Snoop could still see traces of the 17-year-old boy he had once known better than himself, the boy who had helped him bury this very box on a hot summer night all those years ago. The boy who hours later had witnessed everything fall apart. "You shouldn't have come back, Snoop," Marcus said softly. Snoop clutched the key tighter, feeling its teeth bite into his palm. "You know why I had to." Behind them, the old farmhouse stood silent and dark, holding its secrets like it had for a quarter century, but not for much longer. By morning, everything would change, for all of them. Summer of 1998 had been unrelentingly hot in Riverdale, Missouri, the kind of heat that made the horizon shimmer and drove people to seek refuge by the county's single, overcrowded lake. For 17-year-old Snoop Dogg, Marcus Shaw, and Daniel Hayes, it was their last summer of freedom before senior year, before college applications and real-world decisions would force them down separate paths. They'd been inseparable since 6th grade, when Snoop's father moved them to town after his mother's death. Different as they were, Snoop quiet and artistic, Marcus charismatic and bold, Daniel thoughtful and ambitious, they formed a brotherhood stronger than blood. That summer, they'd claimed the abandoned Shaw family farmhouse as their hideout, a place far from parental supervision where they could drink stolen beers and plan their futures. Marcus's grandfather had left him the property, though it wouldn't officially be his until he turned 21. The sprawling farmhouse with its peeling paint and creaking floorboards was a perfect playground for teenage boys, remote enough for privacy, yet close enough to town to be convenient. What happened there on August 12th was never supposed to be part of their story. It started with the sound of a car on the gravel drive, unusual since no one ever came out that way. The boys had been passing a joint on the back porch, laughing about some forgettable teenage drama when headlights swept across the yard. Daniel spotted the car first, a sleek black Mercedes that looked ridiculously out of place on the dusty rural road. "Hide the weed," Marcus hissed, shoving the evidence into his pocket as a tall man in an expensive suit stepped out of the car. Miss Harper's father. Everyone in Riverdale knew him, the wealthy developer who'd been buying up properties all over the county, transforming farmland into suburban subdivisions with identical houses and artificial lakes. He'd made enemies of half the town, but his money and connections with state politicians made him virtually untouchable. "Private property," Marcus called out, trying to sound older than his 17 years. "Can we help you?" Harper approached with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. Up close, he was older than he appeared from a distance, mid-50s with silver-streaked hair and cold eyes that assessed each boy calculatingly. "Marcus Shaw, I presume?" Harper's voice was smooth, cultured. "I've been meaning to speak with your parents about this property." "My parents don't own it, I do," Marcus replied. It wasn't strictly true yet, but it would be soon enough. "And it's not for sale." Harper's smile never reached his eyes. "Everything's for sale at the right price. This land is the final piece I need for the Riverdale West development. Name your number." The confrontation might have ended there, should have ended there, if Harper had simply accepted Marcus's refusal. Instead, when the boys turned to go inside, Harper grabbed Marcus's arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. What followed was a blur of shouting and shoves. Snoop remembered trying to pull Harper away, remembered the man's elbow connecting with his jaw, remembered the sickening crack as Marcus tackled Harper and the man's head struck the corner of the porch steps. The silence afterward was deafening. Harper lay motionless, blood pooling beneath his silver hair. Daniel was the first to check for a pulse, his hands shaking so badly he had to try 3 times. "He's dead," Daniel whispered, face ashen. "Oh God, he's dead." The next hours were a haze of panic and desperate planning. They couldn't call the police. Who would believe 3 teenage boys claiming self-defense against one of the most powerful men in the county? Marcus had a record already for fighting. Daniel was headed to Princeton on scholarship. Snoop had his father to think about, struggling with sobriety after years of alcoholism. It was Daniel who made the decision. Always the logical one, always thinking 3 steps ahead. "We bury him," he said, voice steadier than it had any right to be. "Deep in the woods on the property line. No one comes out here anymore. No one will find him." Marcus had his grandfather's old truck. They wrapped Harper's body in a tarp and drove to the furthest edge of the property, taking turns digging under the beam of flashlights until their hands blistered and bled. Before covering the makeshift grave, Snoop, on some impulse he couldn't explain, took the man's keys and wallet, not for the money, but to make it look like a robbery if questions ever arose. Later, they burned Harper's fancy suit in the rusted barrel behind the barn, watching the expensive fabric curl and blacken in the flames. The car they drove to an abandoned quarry 2 counties over and pushed it into the murky depths. Back at the farmhouse, with the sun threatening to rise, they made their pact. Daniel, always prepared, wrote out what amounted to a confession, which they all signed. They took photos of each other holding the dated document, insurance that no one could later claim innocence. Everything went into the green toolbox. The confession, the photos, Harper's keys, and the man's expensive watch, which they'd forgotten to dispose of in their panic. "If anyone ever talks," Daniel said as they buried the box behind the cedar tree, "we all go down together." But no one had talked. Days passed, then weeks. Search parties combed the forests and dragged the rivers. Harper's face appeared on missing person flyers throughout the county. The boys maintained their silence, though the weight of it changed them in ways they couldn't articulate. By the time police attention had moved on to other theories, that Harper had embezzled money and fled to Mexico, that he'd angered the state, wrong business partner, and met with foul play in some distant city, summer was ending. The boys drifted apart without discussing why, each carrying their secret like a stone in their pocket, always present, always heavy. Daniel left for Princeton and never returned to Riverdale. Marcus stayed, eventually inheriting the farmhouse, as planned but never living there, letting it sit empty while he built a life in town. And Snoop ran as far and fast as he could, changing his name slightly from Dog to Dogwood when he moved to Seattle, building a career as a photographer who specialized in abandoned places, a choice his therapist would surely find significant if he ever told her the truth about his past. For 25 years the secret held, until 2 days ago when Snoop received a text from a number he didn't recognize. They found bones on the old Shaw property. Come home now. Detective Karen lowered her flashlight, but kept her stance wide, clearly uncertain about the tension between the two men. Mr. Shaw, she said carefully, I need to understand what's happening here. Marcus's gaze finally broke away from Snoop. Detective, could you give us a moment? I promise you this is a personal matter. The break-in report was premature. Karen looked unconvinced. Sir, we received information about human remains found on this property. I can't just walk away. Those remains were discovered during a legitimate archaeological survey, Marcus replied smoothly. Part of the environmental impact assessment for the new development. My company has been fully transparent with your department. Snoop felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Development? You're developing the property? Marcus's face hardened. Riverdale West Phase 3. The permits were approved last month. The irony was so bitter, Snoop almost laughed. After all these years, the very project Miss Harper's father had died for was finally happening, with Marcus at the helm. The bones, Snoop said, his voice barely audible. Were they? Native American burial ground, Marcus interrupted, before Karen could answer. Pre-colonial. The Historical Society has been called in. Something in Marcus's too casual tone made Snoop's skin crawl. He was lying, or at least not telling the whole truth. The key in Snoop's hand suddenly felt like it was burning through his skin. Detective, he said, turning to Karen, I'd like to make a statement. Marcus stepped forward quickly. Snoop, don't... About the break-in, Snoop continued, watching relief wash over Marcus's face. I'm an old friend of Mr. Shaw. I should have called before coming out here. That's on me. Karen looked between them, clearly sensing undercurrents she couldn't decipher. Mr. Shaw, is that your statement as well? Marcus nodded stiffly. It is. Then I'll leave you gentlemen to your reunion. She handed each of them her card. Call if anything changes, and Mr. Dogwood, next time use the front door. They watched in silence as she drove away, gravel crunching under her tires. When the red taillights disappeared around the bend, Marcus turned to Snoop, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. 25 years without a word, and now you show up digging in my yard? He gestured to the open toolbox. What exactly were you planning to do with that? Snoop held up the key. What happened to Daniel? The question clearly caught Marcus off guard. What are you talking about? The text, Marcus. They found bones on the old Shaw property. Come home now. It came from Daniel's old number. Marcus's brow furrowed. I don't know anything about a text. Daniel is fine, living in Boston last I heard, some big-shot surgeon now. Then who sent it? Snoop demanded, pulling out his phone and showing Marcus the message. Marcus stared at the screen, his expression unreadable in the dim light. I don't know, he finally admitted, but someone clearly wanted to lure you back here. The question is why. Snoop looked down at the key in his palm. It wasn't to the farmhouse. They'd never locked the place back then. It belonged to something else, something he should remember but couldn't quite grasp. The detective said they found human remains, he said slowly. If it wasn't Harper... It wasn't, Marcus cut in. The archaeological survey is real, but what they found were animal bones, old livestock burials from when this was a working farm. I've been planning this development for years, Snoop. You think I wouldn't have checked every inch of this property first? Relief flooded through Snoop, quickly followed by confusion. Then why the text? Why now? Marcus ran a hand through his graying hair. Someone's playing games. Someone who knows what happened that summer. The implications hung heavy in the night air. Only 3 people knew the full truth, and Snoop had just confirmed Daniel wasn't. Behind the text, if Marcus was to be believed, that left only one possibility. Someone else had discovered their secret. "We need to find Daniel," Snoop said, already reaching for his phone. Marcus caught his wrist. "And say what? Hey, remember that guy we killed? Someone might know about it. We swore never to speak of it again." That was before someone started leaving cryptic messages and digging up your property. Their argument was interrupted by the sound of a car engine. Both men tensed, but this time the headlights didn't turn up the driveway. Instead, a dark SUV slowed as it passed the property, then continued down the road. "Come inside," Marcus said, suddenly looking older in the harsh shadow of the lantern light. "It's not safe out here." The farmhouse was nothing, like Snoop remembered, gone with the dust-covered furniture and peeling wallpaper of their youth. Marcus had renovated it into something from an architectural magazine. Open floor plan, reclaimed wood beams, modern fixtures that somehow complemented the building's historic character. "Nice place," Snoop commented, as Marcus poured 2 generous glasses of whiskey. "I moved in 5 years ago," Marcus replied, handing him a glass, "after Miss Harper and I divorced." The casual mention of Miss Harper hit Snoop like a physical blow. Miss Harper, Marcus's high school sweetheart, their former classmate. The missed calls on Snoop's phone suddenly made more sense. "She's been trying to reach me," Snoop admitted. "I didn't answer." Marcus's laugh was hollow. "Of course she has. Harper always had a 6th sense for trouble." They settled into an uneasy silence, sipping their drinks while the weight of the past pressed down on them. The toolbox sat on the coffee table between them, its contents spread out like evidence at a crime scene. "Do you ever think about him?" Snoop finally asked. "Harper." Marcus stared into his glass. "Every goddamn day." "It was self-defense," Snoop said, though the words sounded hollow after so many years. "He attacked us first." "Tell that to a jury. Tell that to his family who never got closure." Marcus drained his glass in one swallow. "We were kids, Snoop. Scared kids who made a terrible choice. But we're not kids anymore." The key on the table caught the light, drawing both men's attention. "I've been trying to remember," Snoop said, picking it up. "What was this for?" Marcus frowned. "The storage unit. In Kansas City. Daniel rented it under a fake name. Said, we might need somewhere off-site to keep evidence if things went south." The memory clicked into place. The 3 of them driving to Kansas City in Daniel's old Honda, nervous and jumpy at every police car they passed. Daniel using a fake ID to rent the smallest unit available in a massive storage facility. The 3 of them agreeing never to go. There alone to only open it together if absolutely necessary. "Jesus," Snoop whispered. "What did we put in there?" Marcus's phone buzzed before he could answer. He checked the screen, his expression darkening. "It's Miss Harper. Says she's been trying to reach you all night." He held out the phone. "You should talk to her." Snoop hesitated, then took the phone. Miss Harper's voice came through immediately, as familiar as if they'd spoken yesterday instead of 25 years ago. "Marcus, did you find him?" "It's me, Miss Harper," Snoop said. The silence on the other end lasted so long he thought the call had dropped. Then, "Snoop, where have you been? I've been calling for hours." "I know. I'm sorry. I'm at the farmhouse with Marcus." "Stay there," she said, an edge of panic in her voice. "Both of you. I'm on my way. And Snoop, don't trust him." The line went dead before he could respond. He looked up to find Marcus watching him intently. "She's coming here," Snoop said, handing back the phone. Seemed pretty upset. Marcus's expression was unreadable. "Did she say why?" "No." Snoop hesitated, deciding to keep Miss Harper's warning to himself. "Just that she needed to see us both." Marcus turned away, moving to refill his glass. "It's been a night for reunions." Something about his tone made Snoop uneasy. He glanced at the photographs on the table, 3 boys with their whole lives ahead of them, unaware of how one night would define their futures. In the background of one shot, the farmhouse stood proud and whole, not yet touched by the decay that would later claim it. And then he saw it, something he'd missed earlier. In the corner of the photo, partially cut off but still visible, a fourth person. A girl with dark hair and a familiar smile, Miss Harper. She was there, Snoop said slowly. That night, Miss Harper was there. Marcus didn't turn around. Yes. But we never mentioned her in the statement. We said it was just the three of us. Daniel thought it would be safer for her. Snoop's mind raced, reconstructing the events of that night with this new information. Miss Harper had been at the farmhouse earlier. He remembered now, but he thought she'd left before Harper arrived. She saw everything, he realized. Marcus finally turned, his face grim. Not everything. She left after the fight started, came back later and found us cleaning up. A car door slammed outside, followed by quick footsteps on the porch. Marcus moved to open the door before Miss Harper could knock. She stood framed in the doorway, time having treated her more kindly than either of the men. Her dark hair was shorter now, streaked with elegant silver at the temples, but her eyes were the same, intelligent and direct. Those eyes moved from Marcus to Snoop, relief visible in her expression. "Thank God," she breathed. "You're both still here." "Where else would we be?" Marcus asked, stepping aside to let her in. Miss Harper's gaze fell on the open toolbox and its scattered contents. "You found it," she said to Snoop. "When I couldn't reach you, I was afraid." "Afraid of what exactly?" Marcus interrupted. "Harper, what's going on?" She took a deep breath. "Daniel is dead." The words landed like physical blows. Snoop sank onto the couch, legs suddenly unable to support him. "When?" Marcus demanded. "How?" "This morning his wife called me." Miss Harper pulled out her phone, showing them a news article. "Boston police are calling it a suicide, but I don't believe it." Snoop read the headline. "Prominent surgeon found dead. In home office." The article mentioned no note, just that Dr. Daniel Hayes had been under considerable stress at work recently. "The timing," Snoop said, looking up at Miss Harper. "It can't be coincidence." Miss Harper nodded. 2 days ago he called me, first time in years. He was scared, Snoop. Said someone had sent him photographs, recent ones, of the exact spot where—" She glanced at the open door and lowered her voice. "Where you buried Harper." Marcus closed the door with a sharp click. "That's impossible. No one knows that location except the three of us. And you." The accusation hung in the air. Miss Harper's eyes flashed with anger. "If you're implying I had anything to do with this—" "I'm not implying anything," Marcus cut in. "I'm stating facts. Only 4 people knew." "5, Snoop corrected quietly. Both turned to look at him. "Harper's driver. Remember, the car didn't drive itself to the quarry. Someone had to have dropped him off at the farmhouse." Understanding dawned on their faces. After all these years, it was the loose end none of them had considered. Who had brought Miss Harper's father to the farmhouse that night, and what had they seen? "But why now?" Miss Harper asked. "After all this time?" Snoop held up the key. "Because of this. The storage unit. Daniel must have kept something there. Something worth killing for." Marcus paled visibly. "The watch," he whispered. "Harper's watch. We put it in the box, but Daniel took it out later. Said he needed insurance, something that couldn't be traced back to the farmhouse." "Insurance against what?" Miss Harper demanded. "Against us," Snoop realized, in case one of us ever decided to pin it all on him. The implications settled heavily around them. Daniel, always the most cautious, the most forward-thinking, had kept evidence separate from their shared secret. And now he was dead. "We need to get to that storage unit," Snoop said, rising to his feet. "Tonight." Marcus shook his head. "It's a 5-hour drive to Kansas City, and it's been 25 years. Who knows if the unit is even still there?" "It's there," Miss Harper said with certainty. "Daniel would have kept up the payments. He wouldn't leave something that important to chance." Outside, the sound of tires on gravel cut through the tension in the room. All 3 froze, exchanging alarmed glances. Marcus moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peek out. "Black SUV," he reported, voice tight. "Same one that drove by earlier." Miss Harper grabbed Snoop's arm. "The back door, now." They moved swiftly through the house, muscle memory guiding them through rooms that were both familiar and strange in their renovation. The back door led to a covered patio that hadn't existed in their youth. "My car's around front," Miss Harper whispered. "We'll never make it." Marcus reached past them to a panel on the wall, entering a code that caused a section of the stone patio to slide away, revealing stairs leading down. "Wine cellar," he explained at their shocked expressions. "Added it during the renovation. There's a tunnel that comes out in the old equipment barn." As they descended, Snoop heard the front door open, followed by heavy footsteps moving through the house. Marcus pressed a button at the bottom of the stairs, and the stone panel slid closed above them, sealing them in darkness until soft lighting activated along the tunnel floor. "This way," Marcus urged, leading them forward. "The barn is about 100 yards from the house. My truck is parked inside." The tunnel was narrow but tall enough to walk upright, its walls reinforced with modern construction that looked incongruous against the century-old dirt floor. "Why would you build this?" Snoop asked as they hurried forward. Marcus didn't look back. Paranoia isn't always irrational. The tunnel ended at a ladder leading up to a trapdoor. Marcus climbed first, pushing it open cautiously before signaling all clear. The old equipment barn had been converted into a garage, housing a sleek black pickup truck that looked powerful enough to handle any terrain. "Keys are inside," Marcus said, moving toward the driver's side. "We can be in Kansas City by dawn." Snoop hesitated, something nagging at the back of his mind. "Wait, how did they find us so quickly? We've only been at the house an hour." Miss Harper's expression shifted from confusion to horror as the same realization hit her. "They're tracking our phones, all of us." Marcus cursed, pulling out his phone and Snoop's, which he'd confiscated earlier. He smashed both devices against the concrete floor, then grabbed Miss Harper's and did the same. "That won't help if they already have a location," Snoop pointed out. "Then we need to move," Marcus said, climbing into the truck. "Now." As the barn doors opened automatically, Snoop couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The text that had brought him home, Daniel's death, the mysterious SUV. It all felt orchestrated, as if they were being herded toward some predetermined conclusion. The key weighed heavy in his pocket as they drove into the night, leaving behind the farmhouse and its secrets, headed toward Kansas City and whatever waited for them there. After 25 years, the truth was finally clawing its way to the surface, like a body rising from an unmarked grave. Behind them, the barn doors closed silently on the empty space where their past and present had briefly collided, where the weight of dust had finally shifted to reveal what lay beneath.